Good afternoon. My name is Dave Booker. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at UNO, and I want to welcome you all to this session on the veteran writer. First thing I need to say is, unfortunately, Bruce Weigel, who is in Omaha now, apparently arrived feeling under the weather and is under the weather. And so he is unable to join us today. That's okay, because we have two tremendous panelists, and I will be the moderator for the session. And so I think we've agreed that they will introduce themselves. I want to point out that if you have questions, please write your questions on a card. And there are folks in the room who will collect them and deliver them to me so that I can ask the questions. So if you would begin by introducing yourselves, and we will proceed.
This is odd, introducing myself. So, Sharon Robino West. I spent 4 years in the United States Marine Corps working as a communicator in an artillery unit. My family history is lots of military tradition woven through it, all the way down to my son, who was in Iraq, and he also a United States Marine. As far as I know, I'm the only female that ever served. I've served also as a program manager for Lutheran Family Services at Ease program, partnering with the Douglas County Department of Corrections and creating the Veterans Program in the jail, and also started the first Women Veterans Program in the state of Nebraska for the Women's Center for Advancement. Currently, I do work for the VA as a community employment coordinator. I am not representing the VA today, and got involved in the veteran writing workshops in 2014 through Humanities Nebraska.
Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Bradley. Some of you have met me already with regard to another book that I've co-authored, which was nonfiction, the soundtrack of the Vietnam War. But I am also a writer of fiction and a writer constantly, because it's been great therapy for me ever since I was in Vietnam and I got back from Vietnam. And one of the things I'm proudest of is that myself and several other Vietnam veterans in the Madison area, we formed a group called the Deadly Writers Patrol, interesting name. And at the basis of that is writing as a way for men and women who served to sort of process their experience and maybe to get back home. I mean, the year, for some of us it was a year. Unfortunately, these latest conflicts, it's a little longer, but your time at war is only a part of your life. It's the rest of your life. You can try and figure out what that all means and how you deal with it and how you share it. And that's what writing's about. So we now have a number of Afghan and Iraq vets in our midst, and they're going through the same process that we did.
So this program was designed to be focused on healing. How important is writing to that whole process of healing?
I would have to say it's huge, only because of what I have seen within myself, what I've seen within my son after coming back from Anbar Province, and then what I've seen in the jail. It's been a huge tool with the veterans in the jails. So, and it's funny, we call ourselves Nebraska Warrior Writers. So we all have to take on that. But I think it's a huge piece, because I think it has to do with the storytelling. We have to find some way to get this out, and it's in the storytelling, whether it be through the music or through writing, and a lot of us do it through writing.
Yeah, I think Sharon's right. There's a lot of ways to do this. Writing's just one of them. It's memoirs, it's poetry, it's fiction, it's nonfiction. Soldiers have been coming back from wars since forever. But the act of really being home and healing can take weeks or months, years, and sometimes it takes a lifetime. It takes forever. And that's where I think writing, storytelling, sharing, getting feedback, others, having other people respond to what you're doing, and talk about it is just one of the ways. It's not the only way. But for me, it's been a way to get back home, and I know for the men and women that have been a part of our circle, that's been really, really important.
So Doug, what do you write? And how would you describe what you write? Are you prepared to read something, or?
Yeah, I can, which might be fun. And I know we have other writers in the room, and probably critics too, so this will be good. I'll get some direct feedback. It was interesting to be, I was an English major in college, which was, really wasn't going to get me most anywhere probably, but I liked it. And what it did, though, was it enabled me, I think, to be saved in Vietnam, because I was due to be drafted in November or December of 1969, because I had graduated from college the previous May, lost my student deferment. And what happened was they canceled, President Nixon wanted to show that his Vietnamization program was working, so he canceled November and December draft calls, and I made it to the lottery. I got a low number, so not that I didn't make it, I didn't make it out of the military. But my point being, I think if I'd gone in the Army in November, I'd have been made an infantryman, because of being drafted, I could have been anything. And luckily for me, by the time I was in basic training in March and was in Vietnam the following November, they tried to align my skill set with what they needed, so they made me an information specialist, a writer, an Army journalist. So it's kind of interesting to be writing about the war and seeing things that you can't write and share, because I was working for an Army newspaper. I can't say we're losing. I can't say this, we're having, this is going badly. No. But that was sort of what I was observing, so I kept notebooks. And then I came home, and I always thought, like a lot of other English majors do, I was going to write the great American novel. I didn't, but Vietnam kept sort of nicking away at me, like there was something I needed to say, or I should have said, or I wanted to say. So it took me about 40 years to write what I called a unified collection of short stories. It was based on Ernest Hemingway, another great veteran writer, his collection called In Our Time. And what I did was I took experiences that in some cases were real. I mean, I can tell you the people and the names and what happened in the story, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good story. Tim O'Brien talks about story truth and real truth. Sometimes you need to make a story in order to get the point across, for somebody to feel the pain or the fear or the anger or the frustration. So, Dave, that's sort of what I did for that 40 years, and it was really the writing group and having the demands to have something to read and share with my colleagues every week that helped me to get better, because I had to produce something, and then they reacted to it and responded, and I had to rewrite. And that whole process got me finally into this notion of, well, hey, there's something here, and I found a really nice publishing company called Warriors Publishing, not stealing your name, who it's run by a Vietnam vet and his wife out in North Hills, California, and they publish material like this. So I didn't go through a lot of rejections, because I wasn't going to go to the big place. I just went to one place and got it published.
Aaron, I assume you write about your experiences in Iraq. Is that?
I do write about my experiences. Actually, it's my son's experiences, but I also thought it was important to tie in the women, the caregivers, the families at home. And I wanted it to reach, the piece that I wrote that got published, I wanted to reach Americans who may not have those family members and those experiences, and to help evoke feelings for them like we have. And I started the piece, I went to Arlington, and it was right about this time, it was right around Veterans Day, and I started thinking about the esprit de corps that you have as a Marine, especially with your son, also being a Marine. And so I started thinking about that and thinking, I was getting ready to do a Marine Corps marathon, my last one, and I thought it would be really cool if he could come to this and he would enjoy being around this. And at that time, I had asked him once before when he was still deployed in Iraq, and he was very quiet over the phone. And at the time I had asked him, I had realized, I'm asking you to make a commitment to run a marathon or come witness it, and you can't even commit to coming back home. So there's things like that you realize as you're writing that are very important pieces. So that became part of the story. So I kind of intertwined Arlington and the esprit de corps and what my son went through, what we go through as families.
I am not a veteran, Vietnam veteran or veteran at all. I graduated from high school in 1976, so the Vietnam War was over by 1976. I did have brothers who were Vietnam age. One of them was in the 1969 draft lottery, came up number 12. We know what that means, except that he went down to the Navy and enlisted in the Navy and never went to Vietnam. So that was, and my other brother's number was too high. But you know, sometimes life brings you relationships and experiences that connect you to the war. And I have my own life and experiences, even though I'm not a veteran, I have a relationship to the Vietnam War that is, I think, unique. It represents, and it's a story that it is, and you mentioned 40 years. It's taken me 39 years to write this story. Effectively, there are two parts to the story. When I was 8 years old, we had a neighbor who named Frank Brown, and I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana, who went to Vietnam in 1965 in the 1st Army Infantry's in 1965 with Big Red 1. And I still have letters from Frank Brown to my family that I cherish very deeply. If you would like to see the letters, they're in the library. They're in one of the cases in the library, and you can read them. When Frank Brown came back from Vietnam in June of 1966, he gave me his helmet, a South Vietnamese flag, and a bayonet that somehow has been lost over the years, but the helmet and the South Vietnamese flag are also in the library. All right. The other part of the story is that in May of 1977, after my first undistinguished year of college, I took a job working part-time at a 7-Eleven store in Lafayette, Louisiana, and I worked the so-called graveyard shift one night a week, typically Monday night, except that on the week of May 30th, which was a Monday, it was actually Memorial Day, the fellow who worked the graveyard shift prior to on full-time came to me the week before and said, I want to switch with you next week. I need Wednesday night off, and I will work Monday night off. So we switched. And so all I can say is that I'm here today able to tell this story because he was tragically killed in that convenience store robbery. Now, the connection to Vietnam is that Quoc Bao Pham was his name, and Quoc Bao Pham was a South Vietnamese refugee who got out with his sisters and his mother. His father actually remained behind because they still had family that stayed behind, so he stayed back with the family that remained behind. But Quoc Bao Pham got out with his sisters and mother, went to Lafayette, Louisiana, took a job working 7-Eleven, and was tragically killed after 2 years. This is a story that I've lived with for 39 years. Do I have, people say, do we have survivor's guilt? I haven't figured that out yet. But it is something that I carried around when I used to tell my classes this story every semester because it's something that I felt like I had to tell and retell and retell. And I also had the purpose of wanting to remember Quoc Bao Pham, that somebody needed to remember Quoc Bao Pham because nobody's going to remember Quoc Bao Pham. Nobody remembers Quoc Bao Pham because he was only in this country 2 years and had very limited contact with Americans at that time. But I remember Quoc Bao Pham. Now, the rest of the story is that in May of this year, my wife came to me and said, have you thought about where you're going for your summer vacation? And I said, well, you know what, I thought about it. I think I want to go back to Louisiana. And she said, why? Because we don't have any family left in Louisiana. She said, why? I said, because I think there's some unfinished business there. And she said, what is it? And I said, I don't know, but there's some unfinished business there. When I started working on this Vietnam War Symposium, all of the Vietnam stuff rose to the surface again. And I said, where is Frank Brown? So I Googled, the great thing of Google, I Googled Frank Brown, and sure enough, I found Frank Brown, called him on the phone. He remembered who I was, and I said, Frank, I'm coming to see you. 50 years, we're celebrating 50-year commemoration here. 50 years later, I went back and visited this Vietnam veteran. And he was very grateful that I went back and visited him after 50 years. And he was very hard, it meant a lot to him that I remembered him and that I took the time to go back and revisit him. At the same time, I said, I've never visited the grave of Quat Bao Pham. How do I find the grave of Quat Bao Pham? I Googled Vietnamese community Lafayette, Louisiana. I got the Vietnamese Diocese of the Catholic Church was the first thing that came up. So I called the Vietnamese Diocese of the Catholic Church, was immediately connected to a Father, Joseph Sai Tran, and I said, I'm from Omaha, this is the story, Quat Bao Pham, tragically killed. He said, oh yes, his sister still lives here. And I was shocked that quickly I made a contact. And I said, can you contact the sister, ask her where the grave is, and ask if I can meet with her. He called back a half an hour later, said, here's where the grave is. I knew exactly where it was. One of the great ironies of the whole thing is that in order to get to the grave, you have to drive by the store where this happened. It's 2 minutes away to get to that grave from that store. So he set it up. We met at the grave. Here's this woman. She got out of the car. I looked at her and I said, wow, she's old. And it occurred to me, because I only had a picture of a 20-year-old Vietnamese boy in my head. That's the only picture I had, because I was not prepared for the fact, I wasn't in the realization that I'm also 39 years older than I was then too. But that's not the picture I had in my head. And we had this very powerful moment standing at his grave. And she looked at me and she said, why are you here? Why did you come? And I said, I'm here because I wanted to let you know that I remember him. For me, memory is the thing of is the term of immortality is a product of memory. People have to remember who you are. It is, I remember him, and I wanted to pay my respects to you, but I remember him. And she says, I pray every day that he would come back and speak to me. He doesn't come. And there I was, telling the story of his last minutes, because I'm the only one. They didn't know what happened while he was still alive in that store. I knew what happened when he was alive in that store. So it was a very powerful moment. I've written that story. I went to a class. John Price is here. He teaches creative nonfiction. You know, I went to his class and they workshopped it for me the other day. It actually prepared me for this. So thank you, John. But it's a very powerful story about healing. And when people ask me, why did it take you so long to write it? It's because I don't think I could write it until I had that moment back at that grave again. It took that to understand where the missing piece was.
And I think that speaks to moral injury, which goes a step further than the PTSD that you keep hearing about. And I think that a lot of, when you look at Tim O'Brien's work, a lot of what he's addressing is moral injury. And today's, to say what we've learned from writing and the Vietnam experience, today's writer that I would equate with him would be Phil Cly, who was also a Marine. And yeah, Redeployment is a great book. If you haven't read it and you're writing and you're trying to figure out, especially if you're a veteran writer, take a look at that book. I took that into the jail as well, and that blew a lot of people away. But that moral injury piece.
You want us to read or you want us to
I want
respond?
you to read.
Okay, go ahead, Chair, you want to go?
I'm just going to do a couple little excerpts that I think are really important here, and I'm leaving the word Iraq out because you'll see it fits. Let's see. My son returned from Iraq. My son returned. He seemed amazingly peaceful and thankful at first glance. He appeared fine. When he came home from his post-deployment leave, he didn't seem easily startled or lose his temper the way people say that some returning veterans did. He was pleasant and polite and couldn't do enough to help others. I enjoyed seeing his smile, but all too soon his leave time ended and he returned to base. I spoke with him a few weeks later, and the call seemed strained. Returning to his duty station, he had found a new girlfriend who was in the Army. He mentioned that day-to-day work just left him feeling bored. He didn't want to spend time in town or even in the post-exchange because he didn't want to hear people complaining about trivial little things. Loud noises made him jump. He seemed irritable and on edge. He just wasn't himself. With all these changes in his behavior, I began to worry and pray for him every day, wondering when he would call us next. I was filled with a sense of foreboding. I had worried my way through this tour, thankful that he had come home from a safe and sound. What had happened in his life since we had seen him last? Now it felt like he was holding back. So I was building the story from his return. Then I went to Arlington and I started looking for the graves of his friends. And I talked a little bit about how I didn't know whether I should call him to get their names, because he said, yeah, that'd be nice if you visit them, but I'm not ready yet. I went back and forth and I finally said, I'll text him. So I started texting him and names started coming over, and then finally he called me. So as I went into section 60, where all of his friends were, there were as many as 13. I knew a few mothers and other family members who might appreciate a picture of their loved ones to see that they were resting well, taken care of, and not forgotten. Some of the names we had briefly discussed, I knew that he'd be waiting to hear from me. Near the grave sites of Eric's brothers in arms, I saw a man sitting in a stadium seat, drinking a beer and looking at a well-decorated grave. On top of the stone lay pins representing the Warriors unit, as well as several little rocks and mementos. I told the man that I was sorry for his loss. He said he didn't even know this soldier. He had met the man's family the week before and found it peaceful visiting their son here. So he continued coming, honoring the family in his way. I thanked him again and moved on to search for others my son had named. I wandered through the grave markers adorned with flowers and keepsakes and wondered why we leave these things when we lose a loved one to war. I know that the military awards, Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, and other devices and decorations make us as a society feel better. Perhaps we are also acknowledging that this loss is not at the end, that they have moved on to an afterlife, to their next level of responsibility, and a place we have not yet seen. Leaving section 60, I passed a woman lying face down across a grave. She was alone, but 2 glasses and a bottle of wine were placed there, one glass with its contents flowing down into the ground. Perhaps it was their anniversary, or maybe this was just her way of reaching out to him. I had no words. My "I'm sorry for your loss" would never have been enough to convey my feelings or soothe her pain. As I walked away from section 60, I wondered how we best honor their legacy. How do we let them know we will never forget? I know we owe a great deal to my son and his friends, and that they are just a few of so many who have served. I live with the changes in my son and the changes that have come to my family through his experiences, and I live with the changes in me. I don't think that I will ever sleep through the night peacefully, not wondering where someone's loved one is patrolling an area of the world for our safety. I know that when a person goes off to war, they will never be the same. There's a certain innocence that can never be regained. How could they not be changed if they are truly human? Some return to us tired but relieved and able to lead companies or undertake advanced degrees or technical schooling. Others make it back a bit battered, a bit broken, learning to work with their new normal. There are so many veterans who fall into the gray area between black and white. I see how determined, intelligent, and amazing these veterans are, and they give me hope. I feel sure that other veterans and their families, assisting each other and accessing the help that is available to them, will lead the lives they were meant to. I learned about esprit de corps at 17, and it will be with me always as I pay it forward into the world. I still see it in the eyes of brand new Marines, and it is present when I visit places like Arlington.
Before you read, Doug, I'll throw a question. We have a question from the audience. It would seem the process of writing in a group, which both of you have described participating in, would involve becoming vulnerable. Is this vulnerability an issue with the veterans, and if so, how do you overcome it?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think the thing is, who do veterans trust more than other veterans? So the fact that we're a veterans writing group, I think that's where you can, and maybe the only place you feel you can be vulnerable. We would like to make it the fact that there are more places, that we were open and more accepting and understanding, listening. Craig Werner, the guy I co-wrote the book with, is in our group, and Craig is almost like an honorary veteran, and people, I think, trust Craig and depend and respect his opinion. But I do think that vulnerability is in an environment where others are vulnerable too, and you can be open and honest and let down. So is anybody, any Hemingway readers in here? Anybody read any Hemingway, or anybody read In Our Time at all? I mean, the old guys raise the hand, right? But I know about the youngsters. If you remember anything about In Our Time, the structure was he would have a short story. He had some of the Nick Adams stories, and he had the Battlers in there, and then, of course, Soldiers Home, some wonderful stories. And he would have these little inner chapters, interlinears, that were almost like snapshots of what was happening in the war on The Quiet Smyrna and a few others. So, of course, I thought I could be Hemingway-esque and do the same kind of thing. Failed miserably. But it did set up the structure for my book. So if you'll indulge me, and I'll make this quick, I'll read you one of the interlinears, and they are matched with another. There's a reason that they're connected, but I'm not going to give you the connected ones. I'm going to read a little interlinear, and then I'm going to read a quick story because it has to do with healing. The short piece is called "The Revolution Isn't Being Televised." None of us knew much about him except that his last name was Jackson, and he always wore sunglasses, even at night. Somebody said it was because he was high all the time and his pupils were dilated. Nobody knew for sure. Jackson would show up at our office out of nowhere. He'd hang out and work on his company's newsletter. What he was really good at was getting us high on the kick-ass dope he smoked. Most days we were screwed up on the job. It was Jackson's doing. He was also our main source for what was happening stateside. Reading Stars and Stripes and the sanitized versions of Time and Newsweek left us clueless about what was going on, so we depended on Jackson's insights. The night before the ship went down, he told us how happy he was with the way things were going back home. America was owning up to its responsibilities. Before Nam, he'd been everywhere from San Francisco to the Big Apple. He'd hitchhiked from Upper Michigan to Key West, Florida. Everywhere, he was struck by the same good vibes. People were getting high and flashing the peace sign. He talked a couple of us into going with him to check out Woodstock at the Benoit Base Theater. Before the movie, we went out to the bunker line with some other reps and got wasted. Brothers, was Woodstock the greatest thing that ever happened to America or what? Jackson asked rhetorically. How's the movement going here? Lousy, someone volunteered. It'll get better, he smiled. You've got everything that you need at Long Binh. Discontent, quadraphonic sound systems, lots of soul brothers, and great dope. Things will go well here. None of us said anything. Jackson pretended to be our drill sergeant and marched us into the theater. We sang cadence about Jody and his girlfriends, adding a couple choruses from Coming into Los Angeles. Later at the theater, they stopped the film just as Sly and the Family Stone were cranking up the volume on higher. The lights came on, and a voice told us that the VC were nearing the perimeter, and we had to get to a bunker. With the movie soundtrack off, we could hear mortars exploding and sirens sounding. Most of us started moving dutifully toward the exits. Jackson refused to leave. He was standing on his seat, arms raised, singing at the top of his lungs. Feeling's getting stronger, he yelled at the screen. Sly shouted back, telling Jackson he was going to take him higher and higher. The rest of us had already left the theater. The last we saw of Jackson, he was wearing his shades and giving the peace sign as the MPs led him away. None of us did anything to help him. That's the short piece. By the way, it's called Diros Vietnam, so you guys can dispatch us from the air-conditioned jungle. I think of those of you who were there, you know what Diros meant. Let me get into this other piece. I'll try and make it quick, but I struggled with female characters. I know a lot of women. I've got a wife and a daughter. I knew a lot of women before and after and during Vietnam, but I felt like I couldn't write their story about what they were feeling and experiencing just because I wasn't. I mean, good writers can do that, but I was struggling to be a good writer, and I felt like I couldn't do it. And then finally, it hit me about what I wanted to say about it. So almost my favorite story in the book is a thing called The Girls They Left Behind. Lieutenant Brian Miller left behind Carla Bennett, his grade school, middle school, and high school sweetheart. The cutest girl at Most Blessed Sacrament, Carla played Mary to Brian's Joseph in the first nativity play. at which point they decreed that divine intervention had brought them together, and nothing, not even a war, would tear them apart. Sergeant Arthur Poole left behind his fiancée Martha Brown, the finest piece in Kansas City, as his good buddy Willie Brown once described her. Arthur knocked out Willie's 2 front teeth for saying that, and Willie never talked any trash about Martha again. Corporal Joe Hudak left behind Sally McBride, even though he didn't know it. Spirited, strong, independent girls like Sally always found him. Sally was out there somewhere in the USA, and once he got back to the world, Joe would find her. Petty Officer Hector Colon left behind his wife Pilar and her 6 brothers and sisters, 24 aunts and uncles, and 37 cousins. Hector would have to get Pilar out of El Campo, Texas, if he ever wanted to talk to her without some family member interrupting or commenting. Private First Class Billy Donovan didn't leave anybody behind, so he pretended his sister Linda was his girl back home, a confirmed fox, according to the guys in basic training who'd seen her picture. Man, if the game ends in a tie and you have to kiss your sister, then life is good, his bunkmate Tommy DeFelice told him on more than one occasion. The girls they left behind wrote letters and sent care packages and longed to visit their men on R&R in Hawaii. They watched the nightly 6 o'clock news, but covered their ears when the reporters started to talk about the number of casualties in Vietnam. They worked at low-paying jobs and went to movies with their girlfriends and spent lots of time with their families. They gave dirty looks to the guys who came hanging around. They went to bed every night with a prayer for their man's safety on their lips. They waited. The men who came home were not the same men the girls had given such tender goodbyes. Brian Miller had left parts of himself in Phu Bai, where he'd stepped on a C-40 anti-personnel mine and lost both his legs. Arthur Poole complained about the treatment of black soldiers, who were still second-class citizens after they got back to the States. Joe Hudak threw his medals at the White House and convinced himself he was a war criminal. Hector Colon was mad all the time because he couldn't land a decent job. Billy Donovan never really came back. The girls they left behind had to pick up the pieces. Carla Bennett became Mrs. Brian Miller and tried to get Brian to sing along to the songs on the radio just like he did before he left. She spent 6 days a week working at the local Safeway, and when she wasn't at work, she was taking care of Brian. She wondered if she'd marry Brian because she felt sorry for him. Martha Poole tried helping Arthur find a job and made an honest effort to like the Vietnam vets he brought home all the time. She twisted the shiny bracelet on her left arm, a lucky charm her mother given her years ago, and with every twist, she told herself that Arthur would get back home from Vietnam. Sally McBride eventually found Joe Hudak, but she lost him pretty soon after that. He seemed like the perfect guy at first, but when he got back from a DC protest, Joe stopped sleeping with her or even touching her for fear of contaminating Sally with his Vietnam transgressions. She was angry about Joe's avoidance, and she was mad about the war and the government and the VA and everything else. She was debating when exactly to split. Pilar Colon spent most of her time on the phone talking to her family back in Texas. She and Hector had moved north to Kansas City, were having a hard time adjusting. Her mother and sisters gave her daily long-distance advice and propped her up. Hector was unhappy about their big phone bills. Linda Donovan gave up on connecting with her brother Billy, so she dated a lot of Vietnam vets and volunteered at the Kansas City Vet Center. Always a good listener, Linda had a knack for saying the right thing at the right time and making people feel comfortable, which was probably why she became a group leader at the center. The men who came home gave up on just about everything, including the girls they left behind. They quit their dead-end jobs and stopped going to the state employment service, where by-the-rules VFW types scolded them with their eyes about their appearance and their attitudes. They gave the VA the finger and coughed up the crap they inhaled from Vietnam jungles. They joined the VVAW but watched their backs during raucous meetings where guys conspired to kill Nixon and blow up the Pentagon. They missed the 3 hots in a cot the Army had delivered them daily. Or they missed the adrenaline rush and the opium highs. They missed their buddies. They cursed their lives. The girls they left behind joined the same therapy group, but they didn't call it that. The rap group met every Wednesday night for 2 hours. Inside a tiny room with dirty beige walls, cast-off furniture, and one lone light bulb, they shared their souls and cried and swore and hugged and hollered. The rap group girls, as they called themselves, smoked cigarettes and drank Mountain Dew. They broke the ice with beanbag tosses and swapped stories about their men. They laughed when they wanted to cry and cry when they thought they would laugh. Linda Donovan ended up needing the group more than the group needed her. Her brother Billy died in a high-speed car accident, and his death left a hole in her heart. The other women gave her the time and the space to bandage that wound. Martha Poole and Sally McBride almost came to blows, but they dropped their guards and forged a bond. They both liked Getz beer and rummage sales. Carla Miller helped Pilar Colon shop at their Safeway on double coupon days. Pilar made quesadillas for Carla and the rest of the group. The girls they left behind begged the men who came home to talk to them about how they were feeling, to hold them tight in bed at night, to join them in their Wednesday rap group. The men who came home didn't know what to say. They were still fighting the war. The girls they left behind grew strong and at ease. They sang Aretha Franklin songs and harmonized on Neither One of Us by Gladys Knight and the Pips. They cooked and they cleaned and they worked and they believed. They held their men's hands and they prayed to their God. The only people they told about their own pain were one another, and they only did that on Wednesday nights. The girls they left behind were no longer girls. They were women. They were pillars of strength and rivers of wisdom. They were the North Star and the true compass. And slowly, eventually, they brought their men back home to stay.
Thank you, Doug. Somebody must have known you're going to read that when they wrote this question. So I'm going to give you this question. It says, writing can be healing for veterans. Can you talk about the challenges, potential healing involved when writing for those who haven't experienced war? You're talking about these women who haven't experienced war. So what's the potential healing for writing for those who haven't experienced war?
Well, I think part of it goes to, stories don't get told just to hear them yourself. They get told to be shared. And there's a part of listening that's involved in storytelling and story sharing, and I think that is a part of the healing process. If nobody hears your story, nobody feels what you're feeling, then maybe it's not working, and it's not working for you. So I think even those that haven't been there can, I think, understand our pain or can understand our fear. I think that's part of the human process. So writing's one way to do that. I think it's not the only way, but it's one way. And I think it's a two-way engagement between somebody who wants to listen and share and who cares, and maybe the person who's been there and is doing the telling.
I was talking with someone once before I published, and I thanked her for all the support she had given me, and I said, thank you for giving me a voice, and she said something really important. She said, you've always had a voice. I just gave you the microphone. I thought that was really cool. I think we all have a voice within us, and when we're ready to stand up and say, I have something to say, we will do that in some way. So that's what writing gives you.
We're here at this symposium talking about writing. This is a symposium called The Lessons and Legacies of the Vietnam War, and we're talking about writing, and you've read. We've gone to other sessions where we've had politicians, generals, people, I'm sure they write, but they're not writing this. How does the message of the writer differ from that of a politician?
How much time do we have? I think writers are the truth tellers in many ways. And the crazy thing about Vietnam is that it spawned, you could fill a bunch of libraries, probably your library over here, with the books that have been written about Vietnam, fiction and nonfiction, personal narratives, histories, and a lot of it is really good. When you think of people like Karl Marlantes and Tim O'Brien, David Rabe, a playwright, Yusuf Komunyakaa, Bruce Weigel, extraordinary poets, historians like Gloria Emerson and Frances Fitzgerald, Marilyn Young. In a strange way, it was an enormous boon because it was such great material, and I think unfortunately, in some ways, was the only way we could talk to each other. was to write about it. And politicians have to deal with, frankly, I think language that sometimes doesn't mean anything, or it's obsequious. You know, I don't know if you guys are as tired of the last 2 years of the campaign as I am, but I mean, when you look at what is the substance of what people are saying other when they're blaming one another or hollering at somebody. You know, but I think politicians have to deal, the real politicians like the Chuck Hagels and Bob Currys of the world, you know, they have to deal with, you know, decisions, budgets, money. You know, it's not only a different kind of thing, it's a different kind of language. And we've got the freedom, I think, to do something that's a little more liberating and hopefully a little more honest.
I'm pretty cut and dried. I'd say that writing is courageous. It's a whole lot more courageous than people give it credit for. It takes a lot of courage to get raw and do that.
Sharon, and you've talked about your experiences, but Sharon, you've been involved in a local project sponsored by Humanities Nebraska called the Warrior Writer. Could you talk about that a little bit?
We are still meeting. We've been meeting for 2 years now. We meet in, currently we're meeting in Omaha every other Saturday at the 90th and Fort, the Abrams Library out there. We meet at 9 a.m. Everyone is welcome. We do have some family members that also come that like to write. We are also meeting for the first time this year in Grand Island, also at the library, and that has been doing really well. In the spring, we will, the Omaha group will switch over to Lincoln. We go back and forth in the spring and fall. But we find there are people like me who just love to write, and I go to as many of all of the different ones as I can. So it's going strong. We have a Facebook page. We have all kinds of things going on, so we welcome you.
Doug, would you like to talk about?
Yeah, what I'll just do is maybe I'll read you guys. This is our latest. We do put out, you know, part of what we're doing is, I mean, you know, it's not only sharing, but it's sort of getting better at this. And we, at our own expense, we put out our own little publication, the magazine, about once a year. I just want to read you the statement of the Deadly Writers Patrol. The Deadly Writers Patrol began with the mission to, quote, encourage greater understanding of the Vietnam era and the war's effect on individuals in our nation, and had a particular interest in writing by Vietnam vets. Our mission evolved as subsequent wars created new generations of veterans and renewed challenges of understanding, witnessing, and homecoming. Deadly Writers Patrol continues to seek writing by Vietnam vets, but we are also interested in engaging veterans and others affected by the wars in the Persian Gulf, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Their inclusion reaffirms the core beliefs of DWP, that writing can be a mirror reflecting the deepest corners of our spirits and psyches, express the reality of suffering, explore the possibility of healing, help us resolve problems, and achieve a deeper understanding of our common humanity. It can also bring us face to face with the parts of life that will always remain a mystery.
Thank you very much. I hope we've managed to convince you of the power of writing as a healer, and I hope you, many of you veterans who have great stories to tell, will avail yourself the opportunity to write those stories down, because we want to hear those stories. Those stories are your stories are very powerful. So thank you very much.